We just need one person to say they can hear me. Fantastic. Brilliant. So I'll get started then. What I'd like to talk to you about today is how, as funeral directors, you can both support people bereaved by suicide who come through your door and what might be helpful, and also how to support other members of your organisations and support each other, because that's equally important when giving an effective service. I'll give you an outline of the webinar. We're going to start with a bit of an introduction, a bit of background into where I'm coming from and what the work of the Support After Suicide Partnership does and our relationship to SAFE. And we're then going to talk a bit about supporting people who've been bereaved by suicide. I'm not sure how many of you have previous experience with this, but from having talked to other members of SAFE, it seems like it's something a lot of funeral directors do experience, at least annually, if not more than that. So we're going to talk a bit about the reality of being the reality of being bereaved by suicide, how to talk to people who've been bereaved by suicide and make sure that you're giving them a service that's really helpful to them, some resources that are there to help you, and we'll talk a bit about how we can get those to you. And finally, in this section, we'll have some questions and discussion. So if you have any questions on supporting people bereaved by suicide, then's the time to ask it. We're then going to move on to caring for each other when working with suicide and help talk a bit about protecting your staff. Again, resources that can help, which are sometimes the same and sometimes differ. And we're going to finish with some more questions and discussion. So then if you have other questions from, sort of point of view of a business or organisation, we can talk about this more. And then we'll just come up with some conclusions and take-home messages at the end. If at any point you want me to repeat something or you would like clarification immediately, then please just type in the box and I will do my best to keep checking it and answer your questions. So a bit about me. I am Sarah Bates. I am the executive lead of the Support After Suicide Partnership. I have a background in psychology and neuroscience, and I then got involved in quite a lot of intervention work and was volunteer at Nightline and worked with other listening services and trauma support. So I've done a lot of work with children who have experienced trauma in their lives, and that's both physically and mentally. RHSK is the Royal Hospital of Sick Kids. And I then went on to be the executive lead of the Support After Suicide Partnership. And one of the things I'm particularly interested in is how we can improve suicide bereavement support using a national network of partnerships and multiple frameworks. And that's led me to do a Winston Churchill Fellowship in Hong Kong and Japan this year, where we've looked at how local suicide support can be delivered on a national scale. So that's quite fun. The Support After Suicide Partnership itself is a hub of information and support in the UK. We have over 35 organisations across the UK who are either members of us or supporters of us. And they go from really large organisations that you may have heard of, such as the Samaritans or the British Transport Police or Public Health, to some really smaller charities as well. There's one down in Devon, if anyone's from Devon, called Pete's Dragons. They're absolutely fantastic. They provide suicide bereavement support to people, and they will go around your house and they will simply say, what is it that you need? And we also have the only CCG-run service in the country. It's called Outlook Southwest, and that's based down in Cornwall. And again, they are a proactive liaison service. We do the work that we do to the vision that everyone bereaved or affected by suicide should be offered timely and appropriate support. And we do this through research, which I'll talk a bit more about, advocacy. We do a lot of consulting. We do a lot of campaigning as well with policymakers and change makers presenting evidence and compelling cases for change. Keep forgetting how to move the slide along. So, suicide. If you are bereaved by suicide, if somebody you know dies, it's absolutely devastating. And very recent research has suggested that 135 people on average are bereaved by each suicide. We have around 6,000 suicides a year in the UK. So that translates to about 800,000 people who are being bereaved by suicide each year. This might not necessarily mean that everybody's bereaved or affected in the same way. But if you think about it, you have the family who are the people you're likely to come across and who are right at the centre of it often. You may have friends, other relationships that person had, such as girlfriend or boyfriend or very close person to them. Then you have potentially teachers and employers, colleagues. You have the people that maybe found the body. You have the police services. You have yourselves. Everybody becomes involved in a suicide. It really does affect an entire community. And yet at the moment we live in a place where there is a lot of stigma around suicide, and it's not something that is necessarily talked about. And I'll go into that a bit more in terms of that impact on the family. But for the 135 people who are affected each suicide, it means that a lot of the time they don't actually seek support. And so there's a huge deficit of people who may be affected by suicide and may be risk factors for suicide, but nothing's really done about it. So what happens if you're bereaved by suicide? Well, people bereaved by suicide are at high risk themselves. There's about a 65% high risk that person will go on to try and take their own life. And sadly, about 9% of people who are bereaved by suicide attempt to take their own lives. This is most commonly family members and very close friends. When you are bereaved, you may encounter, or you will encounter, extreme emotional trauma, however that manifests. Uncertainty, possibly a sudden loss of income, possibly homelessness, breakdown of relationships, revelations about the person. So that's something that's quite unique with suicide, is that in many deaths, you don't have an inquest or you don't have an investigation into that person after the death. But with suicide and other unexplained deaths, you do. So you may find that the person, for example, had extreme feelings of depression that the family were not aware of, and that can be really upsetting, or that they're engaging in behaviour that the family was not aware of, and again, that can be really, really upsetting for the family. And often, because of the inquest, that can be very publicly presented, and an inquest is a public event, which means that revelations that come out of the inquest can be published in the media, and therefore you may find that somebody who didn't know that their son, for example, had an alcohol or drug habit, finds that out through a daily newspaper or the inquest, and that can be really hurtful. There also may be changes in care, health problems. You have to work with the police. It is a police investigation, funeral directors, and often you face financial difficulties as well, because there's no way often to prepare for suicide, so it can be a really sudden death. And on top of all of this, as I've touched on already, you may have that isolation and that stigmatization, that means you feel like you can't talk to people, or you're being avoided, and we'll go into that more in a minute, but that adds to the compound grief that somebody's already feeling. So how to support people bereaved by suicide, and where do you come in? You are often the first point of contact, prolonged contact for somebody or a family who's been bereaved. And I'll go into that. Suicide is different from all other grief. People often question why. That is the biggest thing we see. Why did this person take their life? What could I have done to stop it? Why didn't they talk to someone? Why wasn't there another alternative? And it's been described very much as grief with the volume turned up. A lady she runs If You Care Share in Durham, which is a fantastic service if you live in Durham, described it once as the fallout of an atomic bomb. And I think that's a really good way to describe it. It is an incredibly painful and complex grief. And as I've outlined, there are many practical issues that you also have to deal with. There's the shock and the trauma, and people can be very angry or confused. They may feel abandoned. They often feel very guilty, and they can be anxious, ashamed, feel isolated. Or one we do get a lot is numb. They don't feel anything. And that can also be, it's a grief and shock reaction. They are reacting. But it calls them to question a lot of this, because this horrendous situation has just happened, and yet they feel nothing. What does that say about them in the situation? So, all of that may walk through the door as a funeral director, and that's why you are so important. Every family, or the vast majority of families bereaved by suicide or any other death, obviously, visit a funeral director. So you have an almost 100% pickup rate of people bereaved by suicide. You are often the point of contact for the people at the centre of the bereavement, because the people organising the funeral are likely to be the people who are closest to the person who died. And one thing we know from research is that the closer you were to somebody who died, the more impact it will have on you. You are also often the first professionals with extended contact with the family. So when someone is bereaved by suicide, they very often find the body themselves. but the police become involved at a very early stage. Sometimes it's emergency services or medical services, but these people don't really stay. They will give the news and they can be gentle. We've done a lot of work with police in terms of how to cope with delivering news of suicide and how to make that as supportive as possible. But it's not the police's job really to stay with the family. And anyway, it's so early on in the bereavement that the family often have no idea how to react or what they need. But then they visit the coroner, they will become involved and they will do things like go to a registrar. But again, these people don't have the prolonged capacity to spend time with the family. So a funeral director is often the first person who has multiple points of contact with them over several weeks. And you're often the first people to give them the space. And therefore, you are absolutely key to supporting people who have been bereaved. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about why this might be really difficult for you to be in that position, and then why it's difficult for the family too, and to kind of go over some of those things. So why it can be difficult for you. Here are some of the thoughts that we've collected over the last months and years, not just from funeral directors, but also from other health professionals. So one is I might say something that might make it worse. I don't think I can make a difference, or they need professional help. So somebody, for example, might be really suffering, and I'll go into that later on, but you may feel that, well, actually, I'm not the person to help them here. It's none of my business. They don't want to talk about it. They're obviously very ashamed. It's none of my business. I don't know what to say. They have support from other people. They clearly have a lot of support from friends and families. And if I try and offer support as well, they might think I'm intruding. And finally, and this is something I feel is probably slightly less relevant to you in your professions, but maybe it still applies, is I have no idea what they are going through. So I have no idea how to even contemplate the pain this family are in. So from the other side, they may be feeling these things. They might judge us because it's a suicide. So they're going in and they're telling you what's happened, and your reaction is absolutely paramount to how they feel about the telling you. Probably guilty. They may be really, really worried that you will judge them and think that's something that they've done. I feel so lost. I don't know if the funeral is different for suicide, and this is something we get a lot. We get a lot of inquiries from people who say, can I bury my child? The priest told us he wouldn't do a church service. And this is going to be on their minds. And often with suicide, it's a world that this person's been thrown into that they don't know anything about. And so these questions come up a lot. They also don't know what to say. People bereaved by suicide often feel incredibly isolated, even within their family units, and that nobody really understands what they're going through because it is such a complex grief and it is different to other death. And what do I say when they ask how the death occurred? So this is something that's often a consideration. Do I tell the person that it's suicide? Do we say it was an accident? We often find with parents that they don't necessarily tell their children because they don't know how to straight away. So then there's a lot of anxiety around a funeral or somebody publicly telling their children that it was a suicide before they've had a chance to. And this is why talking is scary for them. So some common questions you may be asked when someone comes through the door. The first I've touched on is, can we still have a religious service and bury them in a graveyard? And this is something we come across a lot. Yes, is the answer. Absolutely. You will possibly come across religious organisations who aren't as willing to do that. But in the UK, there is nothing to say that somebody bereaved by suicide cannot have a religious service or be buried in exactly the same way or cremated in the same way as somebody who died of any other death. And that applies as well to, can we still have a traditional funeral? Absolutely. Does there have to be a public announcement? So this is something we've had an inquiry through about an obituary. And also, do we have to say the person died by suicide in that obituary? It is completely up to the family. The person obviously has to register the death. But in terms of an obituary, they can write one if they feel it would be helpful, and they can mention it's suicide or not. It's completely a personal choice. And can we still see the body? I think this is one of the hardest questions to answer. And it, to some extent, comes down to the circumstances and the situation. And you as the funeral director feel what is appropriate and what would be harmful and not harmful to the family. There are, however, no rules around it in terms of, no, you can't because it's suicide or anything like that. The issue that we see, obviously, with suicide is often people take their lives in very violent ways. And so that can present a challenge of allowing the family to grieve and grieve around the body without it being incredibly upsetting. So, how to deal with all of this? Patience is absolutely key. And I had a very good chat recently with Paul Olcock, who I believe many of you are familiar with, about what it's like as a family-run business to have somebody who's been affected come through the door and have a family in a funeral that's centred on suicide. And he says that it's very helpful to remember that the situation is often complex and there may be a long history, or there might be no context at all. So sometimes you will have to give that family that extra space and that extra time to tell you their story, because it may be a lot longer and a lot more complex than, say, somebody who's died of long-term illness and has had time to prepare and that, everyone's been very aware of it. So some 3 key things to do. First is normalise the situation. Treat the funeral arrangements and planning as if they were any other funeral. I say that with a huge caveat. Bear in mind that the family will be going through the trauma we've talked about and that they may be really experiencing difficulties. But in terms of the funeral arrangements themselves, there's no reason it should be different because it's suicide. People are so used to being stigmatised and to being met with that treating the funeral in a normalised way will really help them to accept what's happened. Allow them to talk. This is absolutely key. Obviously do this within the confines of what you find comfortable. I would never encourage anyone to talk about suicide or listen to suicide if they find it very uncomfortable. There are ways you can direct things. So, for example, allow them to talk to tell you the story, but if they get into very graphic detail and you're feeling not comfortable, focus on how they're feeling. You can say things like, "That sounds like it's really difficult for you. Can you tell me how you're coping?" Or, "That sounds like a really, really difficult thing to have seen. Can you tell me if you're getting any support for that?" And so divert it away from something you might find quite difficult into something that maybe will help them and help you as well to have that conversation. And finally, consider having a package of support and information, and I'll go on to that a bit more. And that's something that at SASP we'd really like to help SAFE with, and we're working closely with Angela and Terry to make that happen. But a package of support that you can have pre-packaged, and you can talk to the person, get them to take it away with them on their first visit, can be hugely, hugely helpful to the family, and also make your journey with them much smoother and set out that supportive role from the beginning. So as Paul said, one of the best ways to support families is to allow them the space to be able to tell their stories. While we listen and support them, we must be able to support people without judgment. We can also try to signpost people to support if we can, especially with something like suicide. I do want to talk a little bit about, and I'll add in a slide after this to make sure that you actually have that. But I do actually want to talk a little bit about things that you could say and things that are not a good idea to say. And I think as funeral directors, certainly everyone that I've met has been incredibly up on this already. You generally won't say the wrong thing. The worst that could have happened to them as a family has pretty much already happened. And the chances, if you are understanding, open, non-judgmental and compassionate, that you will make the situation worse are incredibly slim indeed. If you're not sure what to say, one of the best things you can say is, "I'm not sure what to say. Can you tell me about what's happening?" Because it opens that door for somebody to tell you what they need. Again, asking, what is it you need? What can I help you most with? I'm here to help you. What can I do? Some things to avoid. Time heals everything. Any mention of religious content, unless the family are obviously very religious and you have expertise and you think that might help. I'm talking more about things like, well, it was God's plan, or he's in a better place now, and phrases such as that. And it's remarkable, people who have dealt with death for years come across a suicide and suddenly find themselves saying things that they never thought they'd say. Just treat it like a normal death in terms of the compassion that you use. I'll put a slide in about that. So moving on to some resources that I can provide. So can everybody see if I hold these up to the screen? I'll just get a yes if anyone's listening. Perfect. Great. So this is the orange one on the slide. This is called Finding the Words. This booklet is absolutely fantastic. I say so myself, I helped write it. It's written by the Support After Suicide Partnership and University College London, and it was written by a lovely lady named Amy Meadows, who we work with very much. And it's full of information and support about why suicide is a unique loss, things to remember when talking to people bereaved by suicide, why everyone grieves differently. Just worked out this film as a mirror image. Things that you might want to say and do. Things to avoid, which I've just gone through a bit, and finding help. And this booklet is aimed at supporting somebody who is supporting someone who's bereaved by suicide. So, for example, if your friend's grieving, then this is the booklet for you to help them. This is available free. And the next one is Helpers at Hand. And this is available directly to the family, or is written for the family. It's written by people who've been bereaved by suicide to guide people through the emotional and practical first days, weeks and months of a suicide. And it covers all sorts of things. I won't go through it totally, but I will tell you that it covers what you may be feeling, what may be happening, people with particular connections to the person who died, helping someone else who's been bereaved, getting through, and then lots and lots of help and support. And this is absolutely amazing. Again, it's written by us, the National Suicide Prevention Alliance, and Public Health England. It's distributed free by Public Health England. The other thing I can absolutely recommend, if I can blow my own trumpet for a minute, is visiting the Support After Suicide website. It's supportaftersuicide.org.uk, and we have lots of information about support. You can also download those guides and many more online. And we also have, as you can see on the left of this slide, a map of support in the UK. What I've done there is just zoomed out so you can see all the support that we have for suicide bereavement in the UK. But obviously you can search by postcode or town and it will come up with something much more concise. The only requirements for that support is that it must support somebody including suicide. So, for example, Crew's bereavement care are on that map. And the support is free at the point of access. So none of the support on our webpage will charge you to access suicide bereavement support. So I would consider having a package of these things. Can a list be put together of booklet resources? Yes, absolutely. So what I would suggest is Angela and I are working together to put a packet of this information available and get it out to people. So if you'd like something, I would say either contact me and I'll put my email address at the end of this webinar, or contact Angela and we'll get the packet out to you and see how it goes. So this is just a screenshot of our website to give you more of an idea of what's on it. Things like what to say, practical support, support for siblings, which is something we find a lot. Often siblings are sidelined, and we find that people lose their brother and everyone says, oh my goodness, that's awful. How are your parents coping? Which is a really good question, completely sidelines the sibling. And we're also currently developing something for grandparents as well. Okay, so I'd like to just finish this section by talking about partnerships that you might want to consider. If you'd like to sort of take supporting someone bereaved by suicide a little bit above and beyond, partnerships are absolutely key. When someone's bereaved by suicide, as I showed you in the earlier slide, they come across a multitude of systems that they do not know before. And so one of the things we found that can really help is having prior connections with those services. So say, for example, and I'm sure many of you running local independent businesses do this already, if you personally know the coroner, that can really help. If you happen to personally know the people at the faith organisations and centres in your area, again, that can be really, really helpful. Because it means, although you can't necessarily pass information because of confidentiality, have that sort of community around the person and supporting them. Other ones to consider are local schools and businesses that may be involved. So, for example, if you know that the local school may have children whose parents have suicide, or being able to be in contact with them. Services. So this is actually something that's been trialled in Durham, and it's a very holistic support method. And what they do is, if you care share, local funeral directors and local police have clubbed together to offer kind of discounts and offers for people who have been bereaved in local services. So, for example, childcare can be 50% off for 2 weeks. So that person who maybe lost their husband and is left with 3 children and a lot to do can check their children into childcare without having to worry about the costs. And they've also done it with things like salons and spas and things like that, because when people are bereaved by suicide, their whole world falls apart, and they often feel like they are never going to partake in normal society again, and that anything they do to comfort themselves in any way is somehow disrespectful to the person that's died. And this is something that they really struggle with. So giving someone that license to say, actually, do you know what, you can go and be somewhere quiet or take a massage or whatever it is, and we can help you. And it has to be done in the right way with the right sensitivity, but it can really help that person just for an hour or so relax from the torment of what's going on in their mind. So it's always worth exploring these partnerships, and you'll know what works in your area. And I would say if it feels like a good idea, then go for it and discuss it and explore it. And if it feels like something that's not such a good idea, then maybe check it with one of us first. But yeah. So I'd just like to open the floor now to any questions and discussion you might have on everything I've just said before I move on to sort of supporting each other and talking to each other a bit more about suicide. Are there any questions? Just while people are typing, I'm going to go over a couple that were sent in. Oh no, I've got one. So I came to the meeting late, but have you mentioned safe rooms? I will at the end. Thank you, Carol. I absolutely will at the end when we talk about supporting each other. Yeah. Oh, who offers our customers for counselling? No, I haven't talked about that actually. It's a very good point. So just while David's typing, there are a couple of questions that I've had asked from people who can't be here today but wanted to know. So one is, should I call the death a suicide if the family haven't? My advice to that is within reason, yes. I think it's fine within the confines to ask how the person died if it's suitable, and use your own judgment on that. And if it is a suicide, the family may struggle with this. It is best to respectfully not shy away from the word. By using the word suicide, if it is clearly a suicide, and they aren't denying it's a suicide, but just not using the words, it can actually allow the family, it can give the family permission to use it themselves. And that's a really important part of accepting and beginning to deal with what's happened. So I'd say use your discretion, but don't be afraid to say suicide if it is a suicide and you think that would be helpful to the family. In other words, I think a family member may be really struggling, what should I do? Listen to their needs and ask what they might need in support, and don't be a gently signpost to support. And one of the ways you can do that, as Carol just pointed out, is to use the Safe Counselling for Customers, which I will post details on when this seminar is published. I'm just having another question. So for those who are bereaved and have no idea the person they have lost had the great ability to take their lives, there is always inevitable revelation to the extent that they did not know the person. Yes, absolutely. And consequently a sense of estrangement. I wonder if anyone's any thought on how to handle that. Yeah, absolutely. And this is something we see a lot. People learn an awful lot about the death. I would encourage them gently to talk about the person they did know. It will be a huge process, and I think one of the challenges you face is that you come across people bereaved very early on in their bereavement, and that can be really difficult because they have a lot yet to process. But when you are arranging a funeral and you're asking people, to remember stuff within the person's life, it's no different. Asking them to talk about positive memories and positive things, and gently over time helping to encourage the knowledge that the way the person died is not how they necessarily lived, and somebody doesn't have to be defined by the way they died. And for people bereaved by suicide, for some people, the person they've lost will always be defined by the way they've died, and that's really difficult. But for some people, they do manage, and the vast majority do in the end manage to kind of come to accept that person for their life as well. But yeah, David, you're absolutely right. It's really difficult in that situation. Did any other funeral directors, do you have any other advice for what David said? Strange knowing that I'm just silently being watched while Simon types. So Simon said, we took advice from someone who repatriates soldiers and have set up viewings where someone might just see the head with the rest of the body covered and has worked for the mum or a close person. Yeah, that's a really lovely idea. Oh, sorry, hand. Sorry. I saw a hand. Just while they're typing, I just want to point out one other book that we wouldn't involve in a package, but sometimes people might ask you if there's something they can read. I should start by saying that I have no financial incentive for this book. It is purely that we found it very, very helpful from people. And this book is called Grief Works, and it's written by Julia Samuel, who has done a lot of work with suicide and children and bereavement. And I should be completely upfront, since publishing this book, she's become one of our patrons, but mainly because of the work she's done. And it's called Grief Works, Stories of Life, Death and Surviving. And it's a series of stories and experiences that cover when a partner dies, when a sibling dies, when a child dies, and facing your own death. And a lot of people that we've spoken to and that have come to us have said this book is absolutely fantastic. It might be something I'd recommend not reading in the first few weeks, but maybe in the sort of the months following the suicide. But completely up to you. It's available on all major bookstores and online and things like that. But it is a very, very good book. Okay, so we'll just go back to some of the questions. Let me just read a couple of these. David Dylan's comment to strike a chord. Our service funeral arrangements stand out as dramatic and puzzling for families. This session is reminding me to remind my colleagues about safe counselling service for ourselves. Yes, and I will signpost that later. Thank you. And expect family fireworks leading up to and during an event of funeral service. Yes, absolutely. And this is something that we come across as well. So when there's a suicide, there's often a lot of emotion and sometimes quite a lot of blame. So, for example, one of the classic cases, which I'm sorry to say we see, is a girlfriend breaks up with a man. The man then goes on to take his life because he's in a really bad place, which may have led to the breakup in the first place, and the family blame the girlfriend. And this can be incredibly painful for everyone concerned and lead to an awful lot of fireworks and sparks and things around the funeral. I would say it's to be expected sometimes, and it's just a normal part of the grieving process. And it doesn't necessarily help you when you're dealing with it on a day-to-day, but just patience and being aware that this might happen. And signpost, I would say, in that situation. I was talking to Terry previously about the crossover between funeral directors often becoming people's support systems and counsellors, and I know that's something that you work with a lot. And I just say to sort of try and stay on the outside of that a bit and try and accommodate people within reason, and expect there to be a hugely emotive response. So I'd like to move on a bit and talk about something Carol's just highlighted. Oh, sorry. So here are some support organisations you can signpost onto, and then I will move on and talk a bit more about supporting each other. So one place actually to support to often is the person's GP, especially if you can build up a partnership with the local GP services. Obviously, you won't know the person's actual GP, but you might have a good guess at which clinic they're at if you live locally. Our website, as I've mentioned before, has lots of information and support. The Calm helpline, which is aimed at men and is for men, is incredibly helpful. One of the good things about the Calm helpline and the whole web chat too is it doesn't start from zero each time. So if somebody calls, if a man calls and they're bereaved by suicide and they tell the story, then the next time they call, that story will be picked up because they keep a short record. And that means that somebody doesn't have to re-explain each time what's going on for them. That can be really helpful. And they do that for up to 6-7 hours each. And the other option, and the option that we always signpost for in an emergency, other than the emergency services, is the Samaritans. And one of the reasons that they're open 24/7, 365 days of the year. Their number 116123 is free, and it's actually anonymous. It won't show up on your phone bill. So I'm going to talk a little bit about supporting each other, and then we'll open the floor again to some more questions. So if we get along, I will answer them. So a funeral director I spoke to recently said it's hard, we're all human. To some extent you can get into a headspace which allows you to deal with it and support the people in front of you, but it definitely leaves its mark on you. I think that's so important to think about when you are thinking about working with suicide. I'll be completely honest and open because I think that's really important. I work with suicide day in, day out, and I have done for 2 years. I have to have really strong coping mechanisms. I think in the beginning I didn't realise how much it would seep into my life, and as a result I found it very, very hard to turn off and to switch off. There's always another person that needs help, there's always something else you can do, and actually it just wears down your resilience sometimes to cope with everyday life and every personal life as well. And some of the ways I've learned to deal with it is to keep work at work and home at home. That's something that's been very helpful to me, and set myself deadlines that I stick to no matter what. So I don't know, this Wednesday I will leave work at 6 o'clock regardless of what hasn't been done. The world will not fall apart. And also to face that it does affect you. Exposure to suicide is something that is definitely difficult to deal with, and it's absolutely fine to admit that, and to need some help coping with that. And sometimes there are days when it's just difficult, it's just hard. I mean, it's different for you in that you don't necessarily deal with it day in, day out, but I have days where I think, I don't want to work in suicide today, I don't want to think about suicide, I certainly don't want to talk about it, and therefore I have those days where I try and do other things, usually filing or admin in my case, but or just taking an extra long lunch break, or going outside for a walk, or whatever it is, and it's just sort of a personal thing for me. That's, it does get to you, and I think that's really important to acknowledge. It is important as well to talk to colleagues. I should have said that earlier on, to say, I'm having a tough time today, you're finding this really difficult, and to get your support from your colleagues. So it is really important to talk about it as a professional, but also personally. One thing I could really recommend is ensuring that all staff are aware that a funeral by suicide is being arranged, even if they're not necessarily completely involved in that particular suicide. That particular funeral. Just make sure that they are aware that this has come in, and that this person may need a bit more space or a bit more time with a client and things like that, so that other pressures can be relieved from the person working directly with it. And consider a procedure of support for someone who is working suicide. So, for example, you could say, okay, well, if there's a case that comes in, then that person gets, say, an extra supervision one afternoon as default, just to make sure that they're okay and check in with them, or making sure that, in some way that they are being supported. So when supporting colleagues, I think it's really important to realise that the person may be feeling extremely responsible and not want to find it hard. They might be responsible thinking, oh my goodness, this person has told me, this family have told me all this stuff, and I must take it on because that's my role and I must be supportive, and I don't want to find it hard. And that's something that I come across in my job day in, day out. And it's one of the hardest things to admit, but it's really important to realise that might be the case. Listen to that person openly and offer gentle guidance and offer reassurance without necessarily telling them what to do. And suggest signposting for them if you think that's helpful. And I'll go on to some signposting in a minute. Also, just check in with the person who was affected even weeks afterwards. So if you've had a particularly difficult case, as was pointed out before, sometimes it can be very explosive and somebody can be in a really difficult situation and they can have had, will be a really complicated or difficult funeral, and just checking in with them a couple of weeks later and then even a month later saying, how are you doing? How are you feeling about all of that? Can be really important. So there is support, and Safe Support is a fantastic service that you have through Safe. It's independent support via phone and email, and there are the details, I'm sure you're all aware of it. And they offer counselling for members. And initially you'd be offered, you'd phone up and you'd be offered 6 sessions if that was appropriate for you. It's absolutely fantastic. Use it, please. It's really great that you have that. And secondly, we are actually, as part of our work with Safe, we are developing a package of support for professionals. And part of that I've shown you today, and the other part of that will be online on our website, and it will have a chance for you to talk things through and to offer some support and advice. These slides will be up this webinar, hopefully it will be there, and some also shorter clips and things like that. Lots of information for local services or partnerships and stuff like that. So look out for that in September 2018, and I'm working with ANZWA to promote this package of support. And finally, finding words. I cannot stress enough how much you should read this book. It's brilliant, and it really will equip you to talk to people and feel confident doing that, and have confidence in doing that. So I've had some questions around this as well, and I wanted to address them, and then we'll open up the floor again for the last few minutes and talk about anything you might want to. So how do I know if someone is okay and if they say they were fine? I would say just keep checking in with them. Let them know that you're there. Don't push them, but just let them know, I am here if you want to have a chat. Not everything has to be a deep heart-to-heart, and sometimes it can just be, are you having a good day? No, it's crap. Okay. Do you want to talk about it? No. Right. Well, I'm here if you do. I don't think we need something as formal as counselling. This is something I come across a lot with people, especially the police. They say, oh yeah, it was really rubbish, but they have this kind of mentality of caring for everyone else except for themselves. My advice is always call anyway. Call Safe Support. You can, or call, whoever it is you feel comfortable calling. You can always make the choice at a later date, but you are losing absolutely nothing by having that initial phone conversation. Even if you start it with, I don't think I need something as formal as counselling. I just need to talk to someone because. Am I affected by suicide by working with bereaved families? I would say this is completely self-defining. There's no shame in being affected by suicide, and there's no shame in acknowledging that it can be very hard, and it's completely up to you. It doesn't mean you're damaged in any way. There's no shame around it by saying, actually, who I am. I suppose by some definitions you could be considered yes, and some by no. It's all about looking after yourself and knowing that you are in a position to be able to help other people whilst protecting your own self and your colleagues and your organisation. So finally, I just want to raise awareness of a research study that's happening that we're in collaboration with the University of Manchester, and you can access it through our website. And what they're doing is they're looking at the impact of suicide in the UK, and they're asking people who've been either personally or professionally affected or even come into contact with suicide. So that would obviously include you. It's live until the 31st of August, and questions centre around what it's like in your daily life and what it's like working professionally, if you've ever had to have time off work because of suicide, and how that is helpful or not helpful, and support that you may or may not have received. So if that rings a chord with anyone and you think, actually, I'd like to complete that, it takes about 20 minutes and you would be working for a very, very good cause. So thank you for listening. There are some details for me, and you can contact me. I'm happy to give out my email. I'll write it in the box, or there is a contact form through the website. And I guess I'd like to just finish by asking if there's anything else at all anyone wants to comment or ask or say. Let me just type. my, oops, I'm just typing my email into this box. There we go. So is there anything they would like to add, or to talk about, or to ask? Yes, I will absolutely send the slides. Thank you, David. Yes, I can send you the slides and any information that you might like. Just please let me know, or copies of Helpers at Hand and Finding the Words. Then again, absolutely let me know, and I will send it across to you. I can also send details of things like Calm. They have a lot of merchandise and things like that, and I can send that stuff as well if that's helpful. Oh, I'm glad people have found it helpful. Oh, everyone's being so nice. It's been fantastic starting this partnership with and working with SAFE, because you are in such a prominent position, and you do come across people grieved by suicide so much, and knowing that you are here to help and willing to help and want to help is absolutely amazing. And yeah, just being allowed to do this is a really huge step in supporting people who have been bereaved, which is absolutely our core goal and driver, really. Brilliant. Yes, I can absolutely email information. Just let me know. Brilliant. That's great. Thank you.